Salt clung to Einar's beard as he stepped onto the creaking pier, the boards groaning under his weight like old spirits waking. He felt the shift in the air before he understood it. The sea breathed differently, heavier, as if something vast moved beneath its skin. Torchlight guttered along the shoreline, bending away from the fog that rolled in thick folds across the fjord. Einar tasted iron on the wind and knew the night would not pass quietly. He had lived through storms that split masts, yet nothing pressed upon his chest like this unseen approach. He tightened his grip on the driftwood post, remembering a brittle ledger he once saw in a monastery on Lindisfarne, its ink smeared by frightened hands. It spoke of a northern chieftain who punished defiance by carving wings from the ribs of the living. Einar dismissed it as a tale meant to frighten fishermen, but the memory returned with cruel clarity. Something in the fog moved with intention, something disciplined, something human. A distant horn shattered the silence. The note carried no triumph, only warning. It throbbed like a wound across the water, and every gull lifted from the rocks in frantic spirals. Einar whispered, "They come for more than plunder," his voice thin against the rising wind. His village slept behind him, fires dim, unaware that its last peaceful breaths were already spent. Shapes emerged, first one, then several, prowheads rising like carved beasts from myth. Longships glided forward without hesitation, their oars dipping in perfect rhythm. They did not shout. They did not sing. Raiders hungry for silver always roared their intent, but these men approached in ritual silence, as if noise itself might offend the gods watching. Einar stepped back, heart pounding with a fear that felt older than his own life. He imagined the villagers herded into the square, forced to witness acts no mortal should behold. The sea continued to push the ships toward shore, each crest delivering them closer, each trough swallowing their shadows only to reveal them again, sharper and more certain. He wanted to run. He wanted to shout warnings until his throat tore. Instead, he stood frozen, staring at the prow where a single raven standard lifted in the wind. Its wings stretched wide, rigid, echoing the drawings from that cursed ledger. The flag did not flap. It trembled as if alive. When the first hull scraped against the stones, Einar finally moved. His legs carried him toward the village, though terror hollowed his steps. He knew he would reach the people too late. He knew the chieftain guiding those ships sought more than spoils. And as the fog swallowed the raven banner once more, Einar sensed that whatever ritual purpose lay behind this raid would soon reveal itself in screams. The night held its breath as if the world hovered on the edge of some ancient threshold, and Einar felt the weight of all forgotten horrors pressing forward, determined to break into the waking realm. I marched behind Jarl Hrafnkel with my shield strapped to my back and a cold that bit through every seam. His armor spoke before he did, a metallic rhythm like a heart that had learned to keep time. Frost crusted the leather straps across his shoulders, turning him into a walking silhouette against the gray sea. Even the veterans hushed when he passed. Silence bent around him. I remembered the page I once touched in the Flatejarbok, ink smudged where trembling hands had copied a line about punishment, meant to unmake the spine of defiance. The sentence lodged like a splinter in my throat. Hrafnkel did not need books. He read bodies. He measured obedience by how the air tightened. We moved through settlements that smelled of peat smoke and warm bread. Captives were led forward with raw ropes biting wrists, faces pale and wet with breath. Their limbs trembled not from cold alone, but from a hunger for what might be shown. Hrafnkel ordered the raiders to spare only those who could witness. The command fell like stone. Survival would be judged by silence and sight. Bitterness rose in me like bile. I had sworn my blade to him. I had tied my life to his banner. When I saw a mother clasp a child, when I watched hands that mended nets quake, my oath felt thin and ragged. Duty pressed one way, shame the other. Each breath became a small verdict. Raphael's eyes flashed like flint. He arranged the square with a theater master's care. Torches, measured drumbeats, neat ranks of men. He rehearsed horror into spectacle. He wanted witnesses to remember, to whisper of it over hearth fires. Fear was his scripture, spectacle his sermon. The night folded itself into ritual. He stepped to the center and named the order as if carving it into wood. When he beckoned me to hold a rope, my fingers found the knot with an awkwardness that felt like treachery. The rope cut my palms. I smelled smoke and iron and a strange sweetness of expectation. I wanted to refuse. Honor sounded suddenly empty. Later, when the square lay cleared, a fragment of carved bone was found where the torches had burned lowest, a splintered rib scored with crude runes. Chroniclers would quarrel over the meaning. The bone would not lie. What Raphael planned was not rumor. The spectacle waited, coiled, ready to be revealed. I told myself, I have already given my life. What else can you take? Though the question offered no comfort. Aldred hit the ground so hard the breath fled his chest. Frozen branches clawed at his arms as the raiders dragged him through underbrush that crackled like breaking bones. His cheek pressed into ice-stiff moss, and the world reeked of burning thatch. Smoke clung to him as if the village begged him to remember its last, choking exhale. He pushed himself upright, but a boot drove him down again. The taste of soil and ash filled his mouth. He thought of the monastery at Jarrow, where he once copied a chronicle that spoke of a ritual in which lungs meet the open air as a lesson to the living. He remembered laughing at the exaggeration. Monks loved their horrors tidy and moral. Now the words returned like a cold hand around his throat. He lifted his head and saw the tools. They lay on a stretched hide near the fire, bone-handled blades, iron hooks, wooden wedges darkened by years of use. Their edges glinted with a polish that suggested reverence, not haste. These were not the implements of looters. They were instruments shaped for ceremony. Aldred felt his stomach knot as one of the raiders touched a blade as gently as a priest handling relics. He staggered when they forced him to stand. His legs trembled. Prayers fluttered through his mind in broken fragments. A psalm for deliverance, a plea for mercy, a childhood recitation learned beside candlelit walls. None felt large enough to hold the terror swelling inside him. He knew these men feared no God he understood. They worshipped storms and steel and the spectacle of agony. Aldred searched the faces around him. He saw no drunken cruelty, no hurried rage, only purpose. That frightened him more than any blade. If they had wished to kill him, they would have done so in the snow with a single strike. Instead, they handled him carefully, positioning him near the center of the clearing as if measuring him against some unseen pattern. Selection, not slaughter. He looked skyward, hoping for ravens or some sign of witness, but the night refused him even that. He whispered, "Let me serve no evil," though he sensed choice had already slipped from him. In the firelight, he noticed a carved plank beside the tools, etched with a crude image of ribs spread like wings. An unexpected truth settled into him with numbing clarity. Whatever role awaited him would not end his suffering quickly. The ritual required him alive. Brynhild knelt so long her knees numbed against the frozen earth. The snow beneath her palms crackled as she dragged ash into a widening circle, each stroke whispering like a warning she tried not to hear. Smoke lifted in thin, restless spirals, stinging her eyes until tears blurred the boundary she shaped. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, smearing soot across her cheek. The birch bark fragment tucked into her belt rustled as she moved, its carved line, the back split to honor the storm gods, pressing against her like a remembered wound. She had read it as a girl, tracing the letters in awe. Now the scripture felt heavier than steel. The ash clung to her fingertips, soft yet accusing. She thought of the captives huddled nearby, shoulders trembling under the weight of their breath. A young man whispered a prayer she did not understand. A woman clutched a lock of hair torn from a child who had escaped or perished. Brynhild felt her chest tighten. Duty had always been her guiding thread, but sympathy pulled at it with unfamiliar strength. What if obedience demanded the breaking of something sacred inside her? A gust of wind pushed smoke into her face. She coughed, blinking through the gray veil. The air tasted of pine resin, sweat, and the sharp metallic tang of anticipation. Behind her, voices murmured in rhythmic cadence. The raiders treated this night not as violence but as ceremony. She traced the last arc of the circle and drew her hand away as if from a flame. Hrafnkel's shadow stretched across her work, long and jagged. She felt it before she saw him. His boots pressed into the snow beside her, each step deliberate. Brynhild forced her hands to still, though her fingers trembled beneath her will. He inspected the circle, eyes narrowing with priest-like scrutiny. She wondered whether he judged her skill or her wavering heart. When he nodded, she exhaled in relief and dread. The blade he lifted glinted with a cold gleam, catching firelight as if hungering for breath. Brynhild's doubt surged. Did the gods truly demand this cruelty, or had Hrafnkel shaped divine will into a weapon? The question lodged in her throat like a swallow. Wed ember. She bowed her head, but the circle she had drawn felt less like protection and more like a threshold. None of them were meant to cross. Leif stood beside Aldred as the torches spat sparks into the night, their flames throwing wild shadows across the clearing. Blood glistened on the tools laid out before him, knives, wedges, hooks, each one shaped with a precision that mocked the crude brutality they served. When the first crack of bone broke through the chanting, the sound struck Leif's ribs like a hammer. His breath caught. The clearing seemed to tilt. Around him, warriors watched with reverent stillness, as though witnessing sacred truth rather than suffering. Aldred's trembling breaths reached him in jagged bursts. The Saxon's chest heaved, muscles straining against the ropes binding him. Leif felt heat gather at the base of his neck despite the freezing air. Sweat slid beneath his cloak. He had faced battlefields littered with limbs and ash, yet nothing had ever unraveled his certainty like this ritual unfolding at Hrafnkel's feet. He remembered the Icelandic saga he once stole moments to read in a Reykjavik archive. A single line described a warrior who fled after witnessing a wing carving. The chronicler's note beside it contained only one word: cowardice. Leif had laughed at it then. Now the word lodged like a stone in his throat. Was refusal cowardice, or was witnessing this in silence the greater betrayal? Hrafnkel called him forward. The command cut through the clearing like a drawn blade. Leif moved because his legs remembered loyalty even as his heart recoiled. He knelt beside Aldred, close enough to hear the man whisper a prayer shaped by terror rather than faith. Leif's hands hovered over the bindings. His fingers shook. Honor had never seemed so fragile. He lifted his gaze to the chieftain. Hrafnkel's expression held no cruelty, only expectation, as though Leif's participation mattered more than the victim's survival, as though this ritual required not only a broken body, but a fractured soul to witness it. Leif felt something shift inside him, a thin crack spreading through the foundation of every oath he had sworn. The smell of blood, smoke, and pine merged into a dizzying haze. He could not tell whether the pounding he heard came from Aldred's heart or his own. When Hrafnkel placed the ritual blade into his hand, its weight burned like judgment. Leif realized the moment had arrived, though the path forward remained shrouded. Obedience or defiance, survival or truth. He could not yet choose, but he felt the world narrowing around him as the ritual demanded his answer. Runna steadied herself on the moss-covered boulder, the stone damp beneath her palms, cold enough to numb feeling. Her breath drifted into the night in pale spirals that curled like restless spirits above the tree line. Below her, the clearing shifted in rhythm she recognized at once, not of worship, but of staging. Her harp, slung across her back, vibrated faintly with each drumbeat, its strings humming as though the wood itself recoiled from what unfolded. She pressed a hand against it to silence the trembling, though her own pulse beat with equal urgency. She carried in her memory the oral lineage of skalds who whispered that the blood eagle had never belonged to gods but to chieftains hungry for dominion, not sacrifice, display, a theater of terror carved into flesh. When she saw Jarl Hrafnkel step forward, arranging torches and warriors with the precision of a king choreographing his own legend, the truth settled sharply into her heart. His movements were too measured, too rehearsed. This was not devotion. This was governance through fear. Runna's gaze fell upon the fragment tucked within her satchel, a carved spindle whorl she had found weeks earlier in a ruined longhouse near Trondheim. Its etched ribs fanned outward like crude wings. She had dismissed it as symbolic of some forgotten tale, until now. Tonight the fragment felt less like artifact and more like accusation. The lineage she bore had woven truth into poetry, but the reality before her was sharper, colder, designed to carve loyalty from terror. She leaned forward slightly as Hrafnkel circled the bound Saxon, his torchlight stretching ribs into jagged silhouettes. The warriors shifted around him in practiced arcs, their stances mirroring ritual patterns she had seen only once before, in a chieftain's hall where a traitor had been broken for spectacle. Runna's stomach tightened. This ritual belonged not to gods, but to ambition sharpened by cruelty. Her mind raced with the weight of decision. To carry this truth in song would be to expose the chieftain's lie, but skalds who angered power rarely lived to perform again. Yet silence felt like betrayal. A song is a blade, she whispered to herself, and every blade chooses its target. A sudden shift in the warrior's posture froze her breath. Several men turned toward the ridge where she hid. Torch. S lifted. The rhythm of the ritual faltered. Runna pressed herself into the stone, heart hammering, as she realized her witnessing might already have cost her freedom. Sigrid gripped her spear until her knuckles blanched white, the wood digging into her palm like a judgment she could not escape. Aldred's ragged gasps tore through the frigid air, each one thinner, more desperate, as if the cold itself tried to pull his breath away. The stench rising from exposed flesh mingled with pine smoke, coating her tongue with bitterness. She swallowed hard, but nausea still lifted in her throat. She had stood in shield walls from Lindisfarne to the coasts of Frisia, yet nothing in war had prepared her for this slow, deliberate unraveling of a man. Her mind flickered back to the rune-marked rib fragment hanging in her family hall. Its inscription warned that cruelty disguised as honor corrupts the soul. Her father had traced that rune with reverence, telling her, "A warrior's strength is measured not by how she kills, but by what she refuses to become." She had believed him once. Duty had shaped her since childhood. Loyalty had carved its lines into her bones. Yet tonight those lines felt as fragile as frost. Aldred's eyes rolled toward her, clouded with pain yet pleading for something human. She felt her heart lurch as if pulled by an unseen hand. Hrafnkel lifted his blade, its polished edge gleaming with ceremonial intent. The torchlight wrapped around him like a second skin, painting him in fire and shadow. The final symbolic cut hovered in the space between action and ruin. Sigrid's breath faltered. She stepped forward instinctively, then froze as warriors beside her tightened their grips on their own weapons. She wondered if a single act of defiance could shatter Hrafnkel's hold, or would it doom her, her family, and every oath she had ever taken. The world narrowed to the beat of her heart. The spear trembled. She could almost hear her father whispering through memory, "Choose the line you will not cross." The blade descended. Sigrid stood on the knife edge of choice, suspended between the woman she was raised to be and the woman she feared she had already become. Kari stepped over the blackened threshold of her family home, soot clinging to her skin as if grief had taken physical form and wrapped itself around her. Smoke still whispered from collapsed beams, drifting upward in thin ribbons that pulsed like dying hearts. The quiet was unbearable. Villages were meant to breathe with sound, laughter, quarrels, the scrape of tools on wood, yet here, silence sat heavy as stone. She moved slowly through the ruins, her fingers brushing charred thatch, the brittle remains crumbling beneath her touch. Each fragment felt like a memory she could not save. Near the remains of the hearth she found a broken pottery shard, its surface etched with an image resembling outstretched wings. Her breath caught. Her grandmother's stories returned, tales of winged punishments whispered to keep children close to home. Kari had dismissed them as superstition. Now the shard seemed to confirm something far darker. She wiped ash from her face, streaking grief across her cheeks. The ritual had not been myth. It had been a message delivered through spectacle and fire. But for whom? As she stepped into the open air, ravens circled overhead, their black wings slicing through smoke like omens. Kari felt dread settle deeper into her chest. If the message began here, it would not end here. She sensed the true consequences spreading outward, as unstoppable as the tide. Thormund pressed his fingers into the disturbed soil, the cold earth crumbling beneath his touch as though reluctant to surrender its secrets. Weeks had passed since the ritual, yet the clearing still held the memory of fire. The winter wind whistled through skeletal branches, carrying hints of old smoke that refused to fade. He closed his eyes and inhaled. The scent lingered like a ghost. He had walked from Trondheim to forgotten coastal villages, searching for proof of practices chronicled only in fragmented annals. Here, at last, truth rose from the ground itself. Thormund brushed aside frost and unearthed a splintered rib fragment. Its curvature and scoring aligned with a medieval description he had once copied in a monastery. Forced, wing-spreading, performed not for gods but for intimidation. He held the bone gently, as though it might crumble under the weight of history. Nearby, something else caught his attention, a leather bracelet half buried beneath snow. Its craftsmanship was simple, likely belonging to a young raider rather than a chieftain. Thormund lifted it, feeling the stiffness of dried sweat and the imprint of a thumb worn into the band. This was not the relic of a monster, but of a conflicted man. He imagined the warrior who left it behind, torn between obedience and guilt, a silent casualty of the ritual's moral cost. Thormund felt a heaviness settle into his chest. In the clearing he saw not only victims but perpetrators fractured by participation. Violence shaped everyone it touched. Terror echoes longer than memory, he murmured, the words forming unbidden. Perhaps that was the point. The blood eagle did not end with death. It lived in those who witnessed, those who feared, those who served. As he recorded his findings in a weathered ledger, a revelation took hold. This ritual's legacy extended far beyond brutality. It was a language of domination, a psychological weapon carried across generations, shaping cultures through dread rather than devotion. Snow continued to fall, softening the edges of the clearing, yet Thormund sensed the echo beneath it, a scream stretched into history, unresolved and unwilling to die.